I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor first to the representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank Ms. De Carlo, Ms. Grau, and Mr. Chevik for their briefings. We welcome the participation in today's meeting of Leonid Kravchuk, the first president of independent Ukraine and the representative of this country in the Trilateral Contact Group. We also welcome the participation of Germany, a member of the Normandy format. I can't see Christoph Heusgen on the screen, but I have every confidence that he is with us, so welcome back, Christoph. Tomorrow marks 6 years since the adoption of the package of measures for the implementation of the Minsk agreements to settle the situation in Ukraine. As you know, this document was signed not on the first day of this armed conflict, which erupted after the tragic events of the Maidan. Rather, Kiev, Donetsk, and Lugansk took 9 months to reach these difficult mutual concessions. Over those 6 years, we still haven't seen an answer to two very important questions. How exactly does Ukraine intend to peacefully resolve the conflict? And how does Kiev envisage the future special status of Donbass within Ukraine? The answers to those questions will entirely determine any prospects for a settlement, because after the beginning in 2014 of Kiev's use of force and the ongoing shellings of residential areas by the Ukrainian army, which continue to this day, the people of Donbass have not felt any connection with Ukraine. If anything, the shellings have increased in frequency. In his briefing, Mr. Chevik said that since the immediate ceasefire came into effect, there have been 92 deaths among civilians. And I would like to say, what is the ratio of those deaths? What sides are they on? We regularly draw attention to this situation because in 2015, the Security Council immediately endorsed the Minsk Compromise that was so hard won in its resolution 2202, and it made the document part of international law by doing that. It was thought that the Trilateral Contact Group that was established by that would be a unique platform for direct dialogue between the three Ukrainian parties in the presence of the OSCE and Russia. There is no other internationally recognized format for resolving the internal Ukrainian conflict that was provoked by the Maidan coup, as was quite rightly said today by Ms. De Carlo. At the same time, our legitimate and understanding desire to draw attention to the need for Ukraine to implement the Minsk package of measures is something that Kiev and our Western partners write off as Russian propaganda and the spread of false information. Unfortunately, I'm confident that we will hear the same sorts of allegations today, as well as the mantra that the Minsk agreements are supposedly not being implemented by Russia. I would like to take advantage of Ms. Grau's presence here and ask her to answer one question directly. Is Russia mentioned in the text of the Minsk package of measures, aside from the signature of our representative who witnessed the document alongside the representative of the OSCE? Please tell us what obligations are assigned specifically to Russia therein. And this will also be useful for the new members of the Security Council who have not yet had an opportunity to get into the details of the Ukrainian file. I would also like to take advantage of this opportunity and ask the distinguished briefers to state directly and answer specific questions directly about the alleged Ukrainian implementation of the Minsk package of measures, which we are going to be told about by our Western and Ukrainian colleagues. Have pardons and amnesty been ensured by enacting a law prohibiting the prosecution and punishment of persons in connection with the events in Donbass? That's in paragraph 5 of the Minsk agreements. In that context, how does it look that even for some people who have been subject to prisoner exchanges, Kiev has not dropped criminal prosecutions, and there are also examples of people being re-arrested? Has Ukraine reinstated control of the segment of its banking system in the conflict-affected areas? That's paragraph 8 of the package of measures. Is there a dialogue underway with Ukrainian parties on modalities of local elections and local self-government in certain areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, as stipulated in paragraph 4 of the package of measures? And lastly, and most importantly, has constitutional reform been conducted in Ukraine? Has the new constitution entered into force, which would involve decentralization as a key element? Paragraph 11 of the package of measures stipulates that that was supposed to happen at the end of 2015. Has a standing law on the special status of certain areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions been adopted, which meets the criteria laid out in the footnote to paragraph 11? And I remind you that those two steps were supposed to precede the restoration of full control over the state border by Ukraine. At the same time, please also tell us whether Ukrainian legislation has been amended to include the Steinmeier formula, which was advanced in the Normandy format back in October 2015, in order to make it easier for Ukraine to implement paragraph 11 of the package of measures. We would like to get comments from our briefers as well about the publication from the Ministry of the Reintegration of Donbass, a draft law that was published to return this region under the control of Kiev. The authors of the document are clearly thinking strategically and about how they can continue to violate the Minsk agreements for 25 years to come. The document doesn't say anything about direct dialogue with Donetsk and Lugansk or about agreeing with them any special status for Donbass. Instead of that, fantasies about establishing some sort of international administration and holding elections only 2 years after that are in the document. Do you really think the people of Donbass will agree to this form of international occupation of their native land? And most importantly, in your view, how does this chime with the provisions of Security Council Resolution 2202? We are forced also to state that the stubborn refusal of Kiev to implement its obligations under the package of measures is no longer being hidden or concealed even by the Ukrainian leadership. For example, President Zelensky in May and December last year asserted, and I quote, "The Minsk agreements aren't needed to resolve the conflict, but only to maintain sanctions against Russia," end quote. The first Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine and head of the Ukrainian delegation in the contact group, Mr. Reznikov, in his article in January said that Kiev would try to reformat the Minsk agreements. In his opinion, this document was rather a political and diplomatic agreement rather than an international treaty. Moreover, Reznikov's term supposedly ended on the 31st of December 2015. At the same time, Mr. Reznikov wonders whether Russia can be persuaded to embrace a modernized version of the Minsk agreements or a new negotiation format entirely. We'll have to say that he has clearly forgotten that the Minsk agreements, as the only basis for settling the conflict within Ukraine, are supported not just by Russia. On the 6th of June 2018, the UN Security Council, in its presidential statement, recalled the need for the strict implementation of Resolution 2202 and the package of measures. However, he asserts with a straight face, and I quote, that Ukraine has fulfilled nearly every obligation assumed at the December 2019 Normandy Format Summit in Paris, end quote. The fact that actually Kiev is quite the opposite, hasn't implemented any of its obligations under the package of measures, clearly doesn't bother him. Instead of implementing the Minsk agreements, we can hear the same, and I'm sorry to use the word, but fairy tales from Kiev about the ongoing Russian aggression that Ukraine blames everything on. And that's even though nobody has submitted any evidence of this aggression, which is, of course, no surprise. Moreover, your predecessor, Ms. Grau, Mr. Apakan, 2 years ago at a similar meeting, stated unambiguously that the SMM has not registered the presence of any Russian military units in Donbass. I hope to hear a confirmation of that fact from you here today. The fact that Kiev is pretending to implement the agreements is something we know full well from the representatives of Donbass who shared this information personally with the Council during the meeting we organized on the 2nd of December last year in Area Formula. Incidentally, the Ukrainian delegation and its Western backers, including the members of the Normandy format, Germany and France, declined to participate. It would have been a good thing today for us to hear directly from the representatives of Donbass, in fact, because they are participating in the settlement process. It's interesting that the participants of the Normandy format, Germany, France, and other countries, aren't shying away from direct dialogue with the Ansar Allah movement in Yemen, with representatives of the Syrian or Venezuelan opposition, and at the end of the day with non-state recognized entities in the Eastern Mediterranean. However, initiatives aimed at establishing direct contacts between Kiev and the residents of Donbass, the real residents of Donbass rather than the imagined ones, as is stipulated in the Minsk agreements, is something that makes them very nervous. Aren't you the ones, ladies and gentlemen, that underscore the importance of a political and diplomatic settlement to conflicts through inclusive dialogue? Where are your principles? We thank those delegations that were not afraid to participate in the aforementioned Area Formula meeting and heard the voices of those living in Donetsk and Lugansk. To those who preferred to stay faint-hearted, I will say that those who only support one side in the internal Ukrainian conflict and, in the face of all the facts, indulge their harmful fantasies about Russian aggression cannot describe themselves as mediators. You, ladies and gentlemen, are rather complicit in the crimes being committed by Kiev against the population of Donbass. In conclusion, I will note that if Ukraine is interested in normalizing the situation in Donbass, then Kiev needs to make every effort to ensure that those living in the eastern regions aren't afraid, but rather want to come back. For the time being, as the representatives of Donbass told the Council, they say there is complete indifference on the part of Ukraine to those living in Donbass. They are interested only in the territories, in the land, or rather in open aggressive intentions. a vast gulf has already opened up, as they say, between Donbass and Ukraine. Judge for yourselves. The laws and legislative initiatives of Ukraine over the last 6 years on linguistic policy undermine the legitimate rights of citizens to speak in their mother tongue. The information sphere is being limited and narrowed. The education system, reforming its very nature, has become discriminatory, which is in particular acknowledged by the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe. President Zelensky's recent anti-constitutional decision, and remember that he in December 2019 swore that he would not shut down any television channels or make any impingements upon freedom of speech. His decision led to the closing of 3 opposition television channels immediately, which caused outrage and even led to calls for impeachment. The reaction of our Western colleagues, who are such boosters of freedom of speech, has been astonishing. They have very kindly approved of this step. What of the bill on internment, or the forced resettlement of citizens of Russia that essentially attempts to legalize concentration camps on the territory of Ukraine? What about the initiative stipulating criminal responsibility for concealing that one has citizenship of another state? How is that supposed to work when the people living in Donbass can't extend or renew their Ukrainian passports? All of these initiatives directly undermine the rights of those living in Donbass and rid them of any desire to return to Ukraine. And Russia has nothing to do with this. That's without mentioning the constant glorification of the aiders and betters of Nazis. On the eve of the Day of Memory of Victims of the Holocaust, we circulated a council document containing a long list of glaring cases of the glorification of those who worked with the Nazis that was put together based on Twitter publications from the chair of the Ukrainian Jewish Committee, Eduard Dolinsky. The scale of this cancerous tumor that has afflicted Ukraine is simply stunning. However, we're not seeing any proper attention paid to this from the OSCE or our Western colleagues. These are glaring double standards. Ukraine should waste no time on prevarications and dubious geopolitical games. Rather, it should change. It should ensure the full upholding of human rights, the rights of national, ethnic, and linguistic minorities, and freedom of the media. And this, incidentally, was the case in pre-Maidan Ukraine. Kiev needs to work to honestly implement its obligations under the package of measures in close coordination with Donetsk and Lugansk, rather than repeating and hiding behind lies about a war with Russia. Is Ukraine ready and prepared to move towards peace and implement its obligations? Are you, our Western colleagues, ready to unambiguously demand this of Ukraine? Unfortunately, there are ever fewer signs that this will happen. I hope to see your principled position today, and also I hope that our Ukrainian colleague Leonid Makarovich will give us at least some reason for optimism. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.